Okay, so in our particular case, we have two different options that we're using methods with. We're having the overloading and the overwriting. And the first thing I'm going to speak to, sorry about that, the first thing I'm going to speak to is the overloading section. Now, in our particular case with overloading, let's say, for instance, I'm dealing with the public void add. You'll note in each one of these cases, it has a public void add, and then it actually has different parameters in each one of them. And what's the neat thing about overloading is, depending upon how you do the call from your actual program, depends which method is called. Now, we're only dealing with overloading right now. So, for instance, if I've declared raccoon as a type animal, raccoon dot add empty set, and that's what I put together in my main. Ooh, that's a little extra O's, right? If I've declared raccoon as type as object animal, and I do dot add, what it's going to do is it's going to call this particular method right here. Now, if I come along and I do dot add 2, 3, right? Then what it's going to do, because of the way that this particular method is called, it's going to call this code right here because there are two values that are sent to it. So it's going to call this. Then what I do is, if I have 2, 3, 4, let's say, for three numbers, whatever they represent, now what it's going to do is it's going to call the method right here. Now what's important to note is the difference between this, and this is this method returns an integer. So in the case of our raccoon, it might call, it might return the number of raccoons. So when it has int right here, it returns a number of, it expects an integer return. So I might have to do something like int raccoons equal raccoon add 234. So I have to do something with that number after I make the call. Since I'm sending it three integers, 1, 2, 3, it's going to do this particular method, which means that it's going to return an int. So I have to do something with that int. Whereas the other ones, if I only send it 2 integers, I'm not going to need int raccoons because of the fact that it's going to call this one, which doesn't return any values that I'm aware of based off this call. It just does that particular code, whatever's written in here. And that takes care of overloading. Now, the difference between overloading and overriding is this. If I look right here, I have a class called animal, right? So if I declare a class called animal and I declare raccoon, and I do add with nothing, right? It just calls the normal class. Not a big deal. Excuse me, it calls the normal method. Not a big deal. So whatever this public void add is, right? So it calls it right in here. Now, if I have this something called dog, right? And I declare, let's say Great Dane as a dog object, and I do dot add, what's going to happen is they're both called the same way, but Great Dane is a dog object. And a dog object takes all the basic templates from the animal class except anything that's declared to be different. So, for instance, a dog, you might have some sort of requirements that involve the dog being knowing the lineage of the dog, or you might have something that requires knowing the speed of the dog, or something along those lines, specifically related to the dog. Whatever add does for a dog is different than what the add does for the animal. They are called the same way, but the fundamental difference is how this particular object is declared. If this particular object, raccoon, is declared of type animal, then it's going to call this. If this particular object is Great Dane and it's of this particular class right here, it's going to call add. And that is the fundamental difference between overloading and overriding. Overloading, it all happens in one particular class. Overriding will take place in two different classes. Overloading, the difference is when you actually do the call, based off the way you do the call, being raccoon.add with nothing, which would call the first one, raccoon.add 2, 4, which would call the second one, 2, 4, 3, which would call the third. But notice the fundamental difference is in how you do the call based off the number of numbers you are sending, right? So this is where you can tell the difference in overloading. Okay? This right here, the difference comes into play in how you actually, what object you make it. So if you make Great Dane part of the dog class, it is going to call add. If you make Raccoon an object of the animal class, it's going to call add from here. Now I hope that helps you out a little bit. I know that's kind of brief. It's meant to be because when you get into your discussions and you start to drill down more into things, that will give you more of an idea of what's going on. But these two concepts, you can make some very robust and very malleable code that way. Thank you very much for your time. Have a very good day, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.